Okay, so that's the Eden Park game is finished. The Springboks missed an opportunity. The Hoodoo is still there, haven't won there since 1937. The All Blacks are still unbeaten in Eden Park. And I think if you're a South African, you're probably very frustrated at the way the Springboks started. The All Blacks got a fast start, and that was basically the difference in the game. They fought back well in the second half. The bench put in a very good performance, especially the backline players on the bench. The 5-3 split was probably a good thing at the end of the day. But to talk a bit more about that, with me is Gavin Rich, who's sitting in Durban, and in what looks like a very nice bar there, Gavin.
Yeah, I'm at my mate Grant Bashford's place. People might remember him as a former Sharks assistant coach. I watched the game here this morning. I've been up doing some writing about the Sharks this week. Not didn't make it to Auckland, a bit far at this stage of my life. I think that just didn't feel like going that far. And you're right, I would have been very frustrated if I had been there. It was to me, it was almost like a throwback to the old days. I'm talking about previous coaching regimes where we sat after games between South Africa and New Zealand and lamented missed opportunities and the fact that the All Blacks were more clinical than the South Africans were. Because that, I think, in a nutshell, would sum it up. The All Blacks were clinical today. They basically made use of every scoring opportunity they had. They scored their points. The Springboks, every time they looked like they were coming back into the game, look, obviously going 14-0 down early on in the game meant that they had to play catch up, and it was a long way back from 14-0, particularly in a wet weather game. But they were just, Rassie said in the build up to the game, you remember, I remember reading your story. In fact, Rassie said in the build up to the game that the team that wins will be the big moments. Today, the Springboks lost the big moments. There were so many different potential big moments in this game that you could pinpoint where the Springboks didn't get it right, like when they would be down in the 22 and off a line-out, the scrum half Grant Williams would knock it on. Other occasions when I think it was Damian Delende made a break and then there was an obstruction. There were so many times when the Boks looked like they were about to come back and get a foothold in the game, and particularly for me in that period about 5 minutes before half time where the South Africans were pressing for a try, and at that stage it was 14-3 to the All Blacks, and the Springboks were starting to win more and more possession, and they were starting to win the territory game hands down. And I think if the Springboks had scored a try then, converted in 14-10 at half time, then I would have made them favourites to win, because they had all the momentum in the game at that stage, and for much of the second half they retained that momentum. So it was a very frustrating game from that point of view. Just that clinical edge that was missing, and this is the thing. And after the game, I'm watching the people talking about it. Guys who were Springboks themselves, and everybody's saying, well, they were a little bit encouraged because they ended the game feeling that the Boks of winning next week, and I agree with that. But we've also changed now. We're not the chasing team. We're actually the leading team. And to me, it's a bit concerning if we're going to sit there and sort of say, well, actually they weren't far away. They only lost by 7. The All Blacks haven't beaten the Springboks since 2023. So it's been 2 years. They've lost 4 in a row. So South Africans should be disappointed. I don't think this is actually a time to sit and sort of say, well, I'm encouraged because they gave it their all and then, they're only 7 points away. It was a game they should have won. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world. I know that Eden Park is the All Black fortress. When you are the top team in the world, and I believe that South Africa have the potential to still be the top team in the world, then you need to be disappointed when you don't get it together. And today, quite simply, and that's why I keep talking about it, the past errors, I used to always think that the Springboks conspired against themselves in some games, and today they did. That's exactly what they did.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, I was watching the game, and I mean, obviously, you never want to give the All Blacks a fast start anywhere in the world, but especially not in New Zealand, especially not at Eden Park. And the 2 tries that they gave up very early were basic errors. I mean, I still don't know what Vidi was trying to do there with the cross kick there, and then they almost waltzed in. And then the second try was just 2 simple missed tackles. It was a good angle by Will Jordan. It was just 2 simple missed tackles, and yeah, those sort of things. But there are more and more of these moments. And I know we're in a transition phase now. We talk about older players maybe moving on and younger players coming in. And I think the Wallabies lost at Ellis Park spooked the Boks more than we realize a lot of the time. Because behind the scenes, I think we both know that there's There's a couple of question marks about players in that team, and to me, just looking at that, I sort of wonder because it almost us reverting to type. We weren't as bold as we were, and then they flooded the breakdown. There's two things. Let's just start off with those tries, but they were two very simple errors. And in the past, we've also seen the Boks give up simple tries against the All Blacks, soft moments, and do all the work and then give up some points. And it's the same when I think Malcolm Marx scored in the second half. We were back in the game. And then we had the obstruction for I think, Ruud and Kwagga running into each other. And the All Blacks scored from that. So that's almost history repeating itself. It's frustrating because that's not the Springbok team that we've known over the last 6 years. They are a team that fights, and they're a team that don't really do that. Today, you're right. Now that you mentioned, I didn't think of it before, but when you mentioned it, it felt like Springboks 2015 or Springboks 2011 that play in New Zealand and just lose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, a game that actually reminded me quite a bit of was actually, funnily enough, a more recent game was 2019 at Yokohama for much of that game, but the All Blacks scored the tries and scored the points. And the Springboks were just they weren't clinical enough that night. And I know the referee played a role in that game with his refereeing at the scrums, and the Springboks complained about that. And I do think that the referee tonight, I mean, no, okay, so when they scored that second try, I just thought that the referee blew advantage over way too quickly. Remember, there was that knock on from the All Blacks, and then the Springboks kicked it, and Beauden Barrett gathered the kick, and he kicked a 50-22, and then from there they scored the try. And I also think, I was sitting with Grant Bashford and John Plumtree was here as well, and he also thought that maybe the All Blacks would have sided that line out. So and I'd agree with that. So that was a bit of bad luck for the Boks, possibly, but at the same time, the kick was poor. The kick onto Barrett was poor, and that was the problem today. It was poor. You mentioned Willie Leroux, and you mentioned the mistake he made. I'd be maybe a little bit more blunt than you and say I actually don't know what Willie Leroux is doing on in the field in the first place. I just think it's time to move on from some players, and I know that he brings a lot to the Bok game on attack and everything. But surely it's time that you now back the Willemses, the Damien Willemse, you back Fussy, or you back Sasha Feinberg and Mngomezulu. I thought there were a lot of positives in that second half. Mngomezulu played very well when he came on. I thought Canan Moodie, not in the entire game, actually stood up from his previous two poor performances. I thought Canan Moodie was excellent in this game, and I also thought that Jan-Hendrik Wessels actually showed, because it's been something that's been bugging me for a while. Who's going to be the backup to Malcolm going forward? Who's going to be the alternative and ultimate replacement for Malcolm? And I think after today, although we only saw him on, it wasn't like an entire game. I think, if you can go to Eden Park and you can play well, then you've got it. And I think that Rassie's onto something there with Jan-Hendrik Wessels. I think he probably is the best hooker alternative to Malcolm that I've seen in the international season. So, and obviously, looking at how the game turned out in the end, you're quite right that we had that obstruction at the restart straight after it was the Marx try, after the Malcolm Marx try. We had that obstruction, and then a sequence of events then compounded after that to eventually having Kwagga go off, and he was off the field for 10 minutes at a vital stage of the game, which didn't help the Boks either. So if you put all those things into consideration, I can understand why South Africans are heartened that they can turn it around next week in Wellington. But at the same time, I think we also need to be disappointed. I mean, you're not going to recover from. You're not going to learn if you sort of park your disappointment and say, okay, we're going to be better next week. There are things that need to be redressed, and a big one is the lineouts. The lineouts. It wasn't that we lost that much of our own ball, but we didn't control it. And it's not the first time this season that that's happened. In fact, it's becoming a habit. The lineouts are starting to become an Achilles heel for the Boks, whereas they used to be a strength. And that's what the All Blacks did really, really well in this game, was actually blunt the South African strengths. Okay, in the scrums, I think that there were lots of collapse scrums that should have possibly been penalties to South Africa. But the lineouts were a problem throughout the game. And, to me, it's actually a shame that Victor Matfield's sitting in the SuperSport studio and not flying to New Zealand to actually help out, because obviously he's a very good lineout technician. We need to look for a lineout coach who's very good at that, because I think that's a bit of a gap in the Bok game at the moment.
Yeah, you're talking about that. I mean, Dion Davids is the guy in charge of the lineouts, and I mean, you're talking part of a World Cup winning team, that a double World Cup winning management team. But you're only as good as your last game in professional sport, in all professional sport. And I think this season the Boks have certainly missed a trick in the lineouts. And you're right, because I mean, we very much are a team that we get set piece dominance. So we either get it through the scrum or the lineouts, and then we play off that. Now, if your lineout's not working, and those two lineouts in the first half, as you mentioned, where we in the 22 on attack, the one Grant knocked on, the other one was a bulking issue, or they took too long. I couldn't quite see what it was exactly. But either way, that's not something you expect from the world champions to have a mistake like that. Yeah. The other thing that bothered me was, if you see one obstruction in the game, it's normal. You could say, okay, the players got it wrong. But today we saw 4 or 5 obstruction penalties, and all warranted. That's the one thing that worried me. The other thing about the referee is by no means, and just to make it 100% clear, because there's always going to be some guy in the comments who's going to say, yeah, blame the ref against South Africans. But the ref wasn't great, but it wasn't his fault. The Springboks gave up those 2 tries. It wasn't his fault of the obstruction. They were fair calls. Where I did get a bit frustrated was the second half when we were chasing the game. He very quickly yellow carded Kwagga Smith. But then after that, Duplessis Karifi had a cynical played the ball on the ground. And in that very last ruck, I mean, one of the Springbok players ran over, and I can't remember which All Black player it was, but patted him on the back. They were trying to get the ball out, and he was sitting there holding it, and the ref was coaching him. Often in games, refs coach players too much. Instead of telling them get off the ball, just penalize the guys. They'll have to realize. And I felt in that second half, when the Boks really needed quick ball, he was almost too lenient there. You get away with what you get away with. But the Boks shouldn't have been in that position. But that was certainly another thing that really worried me today. So,
yeah, well, if we start talking about the Boks not being able to handle the referee and to adapt to interpretations of the referee, then we're also stepping back in time. Then we're also going back to 2000. Then we're also going back to 2019. We're going back to even 2021 in that first test where Rassie eventually came out with that famous video afterwards. You've got to be able to deal with the ref. So although I highlighted an instance earlier where I thought that there were mistakes, and I agree with you that the way the All Blacks flooded that breakdown right at the end, I thought, there might be a penalty coming for the Springboks actually there, but instead of Odia Sevilla turning the ball over, but I'd be reluctant to ascribe the refereeing to the Bok defeat to the refereeing today, because they were just so abjectly poor in several areas where they shouldn't be as the world's best team. Those two lineouts, as you said, half time. Every time the South Africans got into a position where they could challenge for it, where they were in position to score the try that would bring them back to the game when they were 14-3 down, they made a mess of it. Then later in the game, of course, as you say, that obstruction penalty that led eventually to Kwagga being carded and to the Springboks conceding a try. Those are all sort of completely avoidable things, and maybe that's what Rassie will say afterwards, like coaches do, is that we know what to do because everything that went wrong today was avoidable. But at the same time, it's not really an excuse for a team that's a world champion team, and they're not the team chasing anymore. It was the All Blacks today who were clinical. It was the All Blacks who took the opportunities. And just looking at some of those mistakes, it just reminded me of the old days where the Springboks did conspire against themselves. I feel like I'm repeating myself when I say
that. I know, but I mean, I agree with you to a large extent, because it's frustrating to watch, because this was, I think most South Africans would agree, this was, and most probably New Zealanders as well, this was the Boks opportunity to break that record, to do all that. I know it's not easy winning at Eden Park, it never is going to be, but they certainly had everything in their favour. And anybody who's watched the All Black Springboks games in New Zealand over the last, I suppose, 100 years would know that if you give the All Blacks 15 bad minutes, they can put you away. Now, I don't think the All Blacks were particularly good today. I don't think they were the superhuman 2011 to 2015 team that dominated world rugby, and we struggled to beat them, or the Christian Cullen, Jeff Wilson, that Jonah Lomu back three, that sort of quality of the All Blacks. But they were more clinical than the Boks. They made less mistakes and they took their moments. And you've got to give them credit for that. And you've got to give them credit for something else. I mean, we always talk about what a genius Rassie is and coming up with these plays and everything. But this line out in the middle of the field has been overused now. They should actually just get rid of it forever now. And the All Blacks flooding the game, the breakdown, they saw an opportunity. They saw how Australia in that Ellis Park test flooded the breakdown, got the ball away from the Springboks, took them away from their strength, took them away from their quick ball, and they did the same. And there was times there where Grant Williams was on his own, and either way, whatever the reason for that is on the Springbok side, we never got clean ball from the breakdown. It was always Grant Williams' bum. He was falling over. And I suppose another question you got to ask is how many Springboks have to slip on the field before they get longer studs? Now, that might just be something, just that's a sidebar. But the conditions were obviously not great. But we didn't get quick ball. We didn't get set piece dominance. We still did hell of a good, and the bomb squad really. And you talked about Sasha was good. Kobus Reinach was very good to me as well. Jan Hendrik Wessels, that turnover that he made right near the end of the game really kept us in it. And that's the type of fight you want to see in a player. But it just, those first half, those 15 minutes in the first half really cost us.
Yeah, you can't end up chasing the game. It was very similar in a way to that game at Mount Smart a couple of years ago. And then the next game the Boks played, they won 35-7, I think, at Twickenham. The next time they played the All Blacks, so they might well sort of like have experience in this game, because I don't know if you remember that game. It was the start of the build up to the 2023 World Cup. The second game of that rugby championship. Yeah. The Boks had played Australia the week before, but there were very few. There was an excuse for the Boks not to be up with the game that day, because if you remember, it was very much the second string South African team that played against the Australians at Loftus. I think the game was at Loftus. Remember, that was the game where Eddie Jones had a go at Ken Borland afterwards.
Yes.
So cheap shot. Yeah, it was. Yeah. So there weren't too many guys that went to Auckland for that game that had played in that previous game. Whereas today we saw pretty much the team that played in Cape Town play again. And what worries me is that we looked a little bit off the game early on. It was I think you said to me in a WhatsApp, like, in those early minutes, it was almost like the Boks were lagging, and I think there is a wider issue. I think there is a wider issue, Brendan, that maybe we can like set up a forum on this platform to discuss. I've been in Durban this past week, chatting to Saracens and Sharks officials, and the Saracens guys. I mean, it's not just South Africa, talking about the way there's this imbalance in world rugby where the international teams get everything, and the seasons are a mess. And South Africa's season, I'm sorry, can't keep going through. Can't through this. Can't keep playing at 12 and it not to catch up with us. And I think it is catching up. We played against the All Blacks today, so we always raise our game. I mean, there's always, to me, an All Black South African game is always a different game to any other game, in the sense that it can sometimes make the one team sort of go down to the other team's level, or vice versa. So today's game, like, the Boks eventually got to that they pride in there, but I am just a bit concerned that we've got this 12-month season in this country. The guys cannot carry on playing all the time, playing month round. And I know they say get 3 weeks here. I'm sorry, need an on Plumsh doesn't have Boks. And where do you get an off season? You get an off franchise. So I interviewed Owen Farrell this week. I actually had a chance to interview Owen Farrell. It was quite an interesting interview. I said, well, you're back quite quickly from the Lions tour. I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago. And he said, yeah, but mate, I've got, play was quite right. But, it came through that he needed a preseason because he hadn't been playing. And he's a guy who's great international experience. And he was here with the young Saracens players this week, basically starting his preseason, even though he's just played a Lion series a couple of weeks ago. The players need an off-season, they need a preseason. And to me, I know this is a whole separate issue, but it is, I think, part of the reason why the Boks have generally looked a little bit flat this year. And okay, today you'd say, well, it was only those first few minutes they looked flat, but those little sort of like soft moments in the game are also maybe symptomatic of of people who have. I mean, I watched the Sharks play the Pumas. I was chatting to Lansky afterwards, and he said, "Well, it looks like some of those guys have just come out of a preseason," and they have, because I mean, Plumtree had chosen quite a few URC players who haven't played in a while. And you look at the box, and you do sometimes think, well, this team looks like a team that hasn't played together a lot, or otherwise they look like a team that's got a little bit of rust. And I think all those things are possibly true. I think that I do think that the South African ecosystem needs to be addressed. There's something that needs to change going forward, or otherwise, and this is maybe a bit controversial, so I won't actually go into detail. Otherwise, we need to do what Falti, the French coach, did. And when the end of the year tour comes, we send a completely young team and we rest the older guys and let them have a proper off-season for it. Something needs to give. But that, as I say, is away from this game. This game was lost by the Boks because they performed poorly, because their lineouts didn't function. Their tackle completion rate wasn't great in that first half. And the soft moments, like the Willie
whatever it was.
I was going to go Willie Duplessis way back in the 1980s. The Leroux situation. I mean, that was just the worst possible way for the Boks to start. And you could say it's a little bit unlucky. A guy slipped, but to me, Rassie was bold enough last year to play Sasha Feinberg Gomazulu when he was a year less experienced than he is now. He was bold enough to start him at fly half in that very big test match at Ellis Park. And I just think that maybe it's time that you start taking on that kind of boldness again. And I mean, I'm not saying he's not bold. Hooker has only played one game for the Boks before today, and he ends up playing his second game at Park. I mean, you can't have a tougher baptism than that. But just play today sort of just reminded me that, maybe we need to move on from the Willie, I was going to say Duplessis again, the Willie Leroux and Damien Willemse. If Damien doesn't start in the next test, or Fussy doesn't start in the next test at fullback, then maybe Sasha needs to. But it's just time to throw those guys in, not at the deep end, because they've been there before. And Rassie's got to be proactive. We've said before, he's got to catch 22. He needs to win now, and it's really important now to win this next game, or South Africa are going to really be slipping. So this Wellington game becomes hugely important to win. At the same time, he needs his eyes open towards 2027, and he knows.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I would, if it was up to me, I'd probably play Sasha next week and keep Andre on the bench. But you're right, at fullback you also need a change there. I mean, I'd keep probably the centers, because they the rocks in the midfield, and Jesse's captain, and I think he did a pretty decent job captaining today as well. He was in the ref's ear the whole time. Cheslin, you're never going to drop, because he's just superb whenever he plays. He never really plays a bad game. And Kane was good. So I wouldn't make many changes in the rest of the back line. I thought you might, depending on what you feel about Kobus Reinach, might come in. Faf is there. But Grant Williams didn't really, I mean, he made a couple of mistakes, handling errors, but he didn't really do that much wrong. I think the loose trio needs addressing, though, because Peter Steff didn't have his best game for me as well. And that's, by his own high standards. I thought Ruan Nokia was good. Evan came good late in the game. Only had 3 carries, so he didn't really carry much in the game. And I thought probably Wilco Lowe should have started. I thought the front row that probably finished off stronger than the front row that started. And that's with a caveat of saying Oxenchair had another brilliant game. He's always having good games. So I wouldn't make too many changes, but I would definitely make changes for Wellington, because if you lose in Wellington now, then the rugby champion's gone. You've lost your title, the rugby championship, because the All Blacks have got another win. They'll have 3 wins then. And to come back and win the last 2 games won't be enough against Argentina, who, even though they lost against Australia earlier in the day, they were pretty decent, and especially in that first half as well.
You mentioned Ruan Nokia playing well, and I agree. But I also thought that who brought impact onto the field was Lurt, and not just the ball carrier. He was actually very good in the line. I think our line out stabilized when Lurt on the field. Although Ruan took that really good ball against us earlier on. I just looking ahead at the next game. We've got to remember that, it is a 23 these days. So it's not as if you can sort of say, well, that a mistake was made with Wilco. Maybe we did that if we hadn't been so far behind at that point of the game. Wilco would have come on and Lut would have come on and they would have won the game. So, but I'm trying to remember what else. What the other point you made. I was going to react to a point you made there, and it's disappeared. Maybe catch it up on Monday.
Well, it'll probably come when we chat to Nick as well about this as well. But don't worry too much about it. I think
no, sorry, I will go back there. Sorry. When you
Okay.
talk about the loose trio, you're talking about the balance of the loose trio.
Yeah, the balance.
Because to me, Marco van Staden actually has done really well this season. And now we've got Sia, who will probably have to shift next week, because at last there's a sort of genuine specialist number 8 coming in the form of Jasper Wiese.
Yeah, he'll be back this week. Yeah.
Right back into the team. I mean, immediately that makes the Springbok team stronger. I mean, you say that Peter Steff wasn't that good today, but I don't know. I might differ. I mean, he's very influential in the line. I mean, I certainly wouldn't drop him. He's got that huge engine. And if you sort of say he wasn't that good today, it's judging him on his standards.
His standards,
you're judging Graham Pollock, the batsman, on Graham Pollock's standards or AB de Villiers' standards, not on a general sort of like man in the street standard. I mean, we're talking about a double world, but the balance of that loose trio is going to be interesting because, obviously Sia's got to probably reassume the captaincy as well and take that number 6 jersey. But I almost feel sorry then for Marco van Staden, because he's got a role that he plays there that the Boks actually need, and he's done really well in the last couple of tests.
Yeah, and you also know what he's always going to give everything. I mean, he's that one of those guys that he'll always come off the field bloodied and battered and bruised. And when I say Peter Steff, to use your Graham Pollock analogy, it's like Graham Pollock scoring 45 in a game and not 274. It's that sort of thing that we not that he batted badly. It's just I just think by his own standards he wasn't as influential. He gave away the one very silly penalty by playing the halfback. But I'm not suggesting dropping him, because I don't think we have another 7 that in the squad at the moment that would probably do better. And that's what it comes down to. If you're going to make changes, it's going to be to make the team stronger. And Jasper will.
It's the balance.
Yeah, and the balance. If you have Sia, Peter Steff, and Jasper, then it's a big, maybe Marco on the bench.
You know what I wouldn't mind. And I mean, the Jacques Nienaber was the coach at the time, obviously with Rassie in the background, and he got pilloried for it at the time. But I wouldn't mind Malcolm coming on as an impact player rather than starting. If Jan-Hendrik Wessels, let's see if he's actually the real deal. Let's give him a starting role in this game, and then have Malcolm. Because Malcolm is always very, somebody asked me the other day, like, what's happened to the bomb squad? And I thought about it for a while. And one of the things I thought about was that back in the day, it was often Bongi who started, and Malcolm who was part of the bomb squad. And maybe that's what they're missing is that Malcolm influence coming on later in the game as a finisher rather than as a starter. And Jan-Hendrik did that well today, but maybe if Rassie going forward, I don't know if you want to do it in this must-win next test, but at some stage it would be good to see Jan-Hendrik get a couple of the games as a starter, and Malcolm reprising his old, very effective role as a member of the bomb squad. I mean, the outlier to all of that is that game in Nelspruit in 2022 where Malcolm started and he was brilliant as a starter, and the Boks basically buried the All Blacks off Malcolm. And Malcolm was also a starter, if I remember correctly, in that game where they won 35-7 before the World Cup at Twickenham. Malcolm started in that game, and he was very much boss of the game. We were actually on the World Cup enough without Malcolm, and we ended we ended the final with Deon Fourie at hooker. But Malcolm, I think, is a very essential member of the team. But he might be as effective, if not more effective, as an impact sub as he is as a starter. If you've got a player who can play, who can do that role as a starter. Bongi used to be able to do it. I'm not sure that Bongi can do that anymore. So Jan-Hendrik Wessels is the guy who maybe should be thrust into the spotlight.
We're running out of time, so I'm just going to give you a final thought here. But for me, I think it comes down to 2 words: missed opportunity. Because I think you don't see All Black teams vulnerable like this at Eden Park. And let's be honest, the Springboks didn't win, so they can't really make that claim. But the All Blacks were vulnerable before this game, and the
Well,
Boks missed an opportunity. That's my take on this whole game. Then, if you want to sign off with that, and what you want to say.
yeah. No, well, look, I was before the game. Obviously, I was here, and I mean, I was watching with rugby people, with Grant Bashwood and with John Plumtree, who's obviously been an All Black assistant coach, and when I saw the teams lining up before the game, my comment was that, and I mean, I know New Zealanders will get upset with me for saying this, but it's actually not, because it's actually a compliment to their previous teams. I actually said this All Black team doesn't have the mana, and New Zealanders will know what I mean. I'll say that it doesn't have the mana of some of the All Black teams, and that's why I think it's a mistake. With all due respect to New Zealand, I think they're at different parts of their stage of their development than the Springboks are. The Springboks have won 2 World Cups in a row. They're still at the apex. They've got to regenerate, because they've got to be ready for the next World Cup. So they've got to start bringing in new players. But it's the All Blacks who are sort of like almost like starting out again. And I don't look at that that All Black team and think it's actually a great team. In fact, to be honest with you, when I look at the two teams, it's number 1 and number 2 in the world against each other. But I'm not so sure that that world order is so sort of defined at the moment as it was at one point. If somebody came in from the Northern Hemisphere and said to me, that's not number 1 playing number 2, I would argue because that's what the world rankings say. And it's not New Zealand's fault that France sent a second string team to New Zealand back in July. But at the moment, I wouldn't say that either team is right at the apex, and that's why it's a missed opportunity, because this All Black team was ripe for the picking, and I think they will be next week.
Yeah, but that's all very well good saying, but the Boks did lose. We'll be back with Nick Mallett. Thanks, Gav, for joining me. Go enjoy the wonderful weather there in Durban. Looks like a stunning day outside there. So, we'll be back on.
Raining.
Is it raining?
It's raining.
Oh, geez,
yeah. Are you a New Zealander? You're used to rain. It's raining. I don't know what a good day is for you, but rain is not good. Not good for me.
Okay. Well, go enjoy it, and send regards to Bashi. Okay, mate. Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers.